What's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to be discussing a topic that I find hugely interesting. I'm going to be taking a look at how much porn and self-pleasure is possibly impacting on your life. I think, as is the case with most things in everyday life, it very much lends itself to extremism. So on this side, you've got the idea that watching porn, self-pleasure, and really having it as a big part of your life is completely normal and is something that most human beings should do. And then on the other side, you've got NoFap. The idea that any type of porn, any type of self-pleasure is bad, should be avoided, and by giving it up you're going to have these magical, mythical benefits and your life is going to transform there and then. I think, as is the case with most things in life, the truth is going to be somewhere in between, and my hope is that this video will help you to find that in between. So I'm going to be breaking down 4 things you should consider when it comes to your relationship with porn and it comes to your relationship with self-pleasure. So your first consideration should be objectification and just how much of an impact that objectification is having on your everyday life. So let's talk a little bit about objectification and how that really links into porn. So if you're watching a lot of porn, you're going to notice that a lot of the women in porn look a certain way. A lot of those women will have very similar bodies. They'll probably have very similar shaped bodies, and you'll begin to normalize that that is what an everyday woman should look like. And of course, this creates a very unrealistic and a very high standard and unfair expectation that you'll put on women in everyday life. And you'll probably begin to find that the more porn you watch, the more you're objectifying women in everyday life, and they're falling massively short of what you're seeing in porn. Short term, you can probably challenge that, and short term, you can probably separate them and categorize everyday women as being attractive in their own way and dismiss porn stars and female porn stars as just being something completely different. However, the more you begin to watch it, the more you're going to normalise that women should look like female porn stars. And this may mean that as you come to interact with everyday women and you come to be sexually active with everyday women, you're just not going to feel anything because they don't reach these really high subconscious standards that you've set for women in your mind. And the other side of that too is that it will become harder and harder and harder to interact with women in everyday life. So when you're watching porn, you're essentially seeing women that are just there to do a purpose. That purpose is to arouse you. That purpose is to turn you on. And you may find that the more you see that, the more you don't relate to women in everyday life. You'll become less aware of the feelings that they've got. You'll become less aware that they are people with their own values, their own wants, their own aspirations, and their own desires. And of course, again, you may be able to challenge that in the short term, but it will become harder and harder and harder to do, because it will become cyclical. You'll watch more porn, you'll struggle to relate to women in everyday life, so then you'll find yourself watching porn and keep repeating that same cycle, watching more porn and struggling to relate more and more to women in everyday life. And the other side of that too, you objectify yourself a lot more. So when you're watching porn, at times you're probably going to see male porn stars. And again, those male porn stars are going to project a very high standard, and a very high standard that you probably will never ever be able to reach, both in terms of physical characteristics, and I'm sure you can guess what physical characteristic we're talking about, but also in terms of performance, in terms of stamina, and just in terms of sheer sexual virility. Again, short term it's probably okay, you can recognise that and you can say that that's okay, I don't need to match that standard, I don't need to challenge that. But the longer this goes on, you'll begin to find yourself objectifying yourself up against it more and more. Your self-esteem will begin to drop, and you'll begin to develop a much worse opinion of yourself. And this worse opinion of yourself won't just stop there, because you'll find yourself objectifying yourself against other men consistently in everyday life. This may just be male celebrities, but it also may be male colleagues and male friends, and you'll turn life into this big ego game because you've developed this insecurity and this need to compare and this need to almost compare yourself to every person that you meet, even if it's an unrealistic standard. So this is the consideration with this point. Are you doing any of those things? Can you still chat? Can you still engage? Can you still flirt with women in everyday life? Do you still have a good opinion about yourself? Do you still feel good when you look in the mirror? Do you still feel comfortable when you're naked? If the answer to all of those things is yes, then it's not something that you need to worry about. But if it is, and everything that I just discussed is really impacting on you, that's a problem. And that's a problem that you really need to look into. And it may be that stopping porn can be one of the most positive steps that you can take in order to do so. So your second consideration is just, what is your threshold? What do you need to see in order to be aroused? So cast your mind back to when you were 13, 14 years old and you began to become aware that you were a sexually minded human being. You began to become aware that looking at attractive people could elicit and create a certain response in you. Back then it probably felt really fresh, and I'm sure when it felt really fresh then, your threshold for arousal was probably very low. So you could probably walk through everyday life and you could see an attractive woman and you'd feel something. Then it possibly got a little bit more, and it would mean that you needed to see a pair of boobs in order to feel arousal. Then you possibly got a little bit bored with a pair of boobs, so then you needed to see a fully naked woman in order to feel full arousal. That's a normal process, and that's essentially what happens. Again, that's the normalization, and that's the beginning to become accepting of things being normal. However, what you'll see with guys that watch a lot of porn, and what you'll see with guys that have a very porn dominant lifestyle, they begin to have a higher and higher threshold of what it takes them to be aroused. So a naked woman doesn't cut it anymore. 2 naked women doesn't cut it anymore. 3 naked women doesn't cut it anymore. Sex itself doesn't cut it anymore. They need something higher. They need something more. And of course, again, it makes sense. This is normalization. The more you see something, the more normal it becomes in your mind and the less exciting it becomes. But we're not just talking about everyday things. We're talking about sex. We're talking about an intimate act. And we're talking about things that can have very damaging consequences if you stray into the wrong territory. So you need to be mindful of what is your threshold when it comes to watching porn. Does simple, relatively harmless stuff turn you on? Or do you need something more? Do you need something that gives you shame when you've watched it to feel turned on? Do you need something that's really sexually out there in order to feel turned on? Do you need something that you can't even understand why it turns you on to turn you on? You just know that you need it. If the answer is yes to some of those questions, and you contrast your search history from years ago to where it's at now, and where it's at now is a dark, strange and worrying place, that's a red flag. And that's a consideration that you definitely need to have, that you need to stop watching porn. Because it may not stop there. Your threshold may get higher, and you may find yourself beginning to need more and more extreme things to get arousal. And those extreme things, again, they won't just link into your relationship with porn, they'll link into your relationship with everyday women in everyday life. So simple, fun, great sex between 2 attractive people and 2 people that want to be with each other may not do it for you. And you may find yourself struggling to feel arousal, you may find yourself struggling to perform, and you may just find your mind just going to the extreme things that you've had in porn. You don't want that. You absolutely do not want that. That's going to impact on your relationship, and that's going to impact on your own relationship with yourself. So that is a top consideration to have, and one that you definitely need to be mindful of before it happens and before it gets too late. Third thing that you need to consider is, do you masturbate out of routine? Do you masturbate out of enjoyment? Or do you masturbate out of the fact that you need it in order to function? So like anything, masturbation is addictive. And like anything, masturbation and porn elicits the same mental response of dopamine when it's watched. A common cycle that you'll see in a lot of addicts is something starts off as being fun, something starts off as being exciting, and something just starts off as just being something that they look forward to, but they can function without. Then that something becomes something that they needed almost as part of their routine. So if you're thinking of someone who's on the cusp of becoming an alcoholic, what starts off as drinking once a week maybe becomes drinking every single day. But just as alcoholism and needing to drink every single day can stay at that, it doesn't always. And this is when you know it becomes problematic, is when you need to have a drink or you need to do a certain act in order to function. And unfortunately, exactly the same thing can happen with porn and masturbation. So something that starts off as exciting and something that starts off as a part of enjoyment then becomes something that you do as part of your routine. Before long, it becomes something that you need in order to function every single day. So how do you feel when you don't masturbate? Do you feel down? Do you feel a bit desolate? Do you feel like you need a really strong dopamine hit in order to give you energy? Do you feel lethargic? Do you feel a bit lifeless? Are you sitting there struggling to concentrate because you need something to lift you? You need something to give you that dopamine there and then. If that's the case, then this is probably a sign that your interest in porn and your enjoyment of porn is now probably strayed all the way through to that, all the way through into routine, and it's now strayed to the point where it is a full-on addiction. And I think, as is the case, when something reaches a full-on point of addiction, this is when you need to consider giving it up. Or at the very least, you need to consider a way that you can manage it and park it at the side of your mind so you can function in other aspects of your life. This, unfortunately, with porn is slightly more challenging because porn is so accessible. Most people can turn on their computer and they can access their favourite site in a matter of seconds. There's no action of needing to go out and buy anything. There's no action of needing to have friends around to do something. Essentially, porn can hit you when you're at your lowest, and porn can hit you when you need something to perk you up. And it's not the hardest thing in the world to get, so if you need it, you can give it to yourself. Unfortunately, doing that is probably going to be the worst thing that you do, and like any addiction, you're going to continue to fuel it and you're going to continue to make it worse and worse. So, this is a challenging one to do, and what I recommend that you do at this point is, if you are there, you cycle it. You just have a week where you don't watch porn at all, you have a week where you don't really masturbate, and you have just a week which is just all about the other things. And then at the end of the week you say, did I function? Did I perform? Was I my normal self? Or was I experiencing all the symptoms of addiction? If you are, it's a serious problem, and it's one that you need to address, and it's one that you probably need to remove completely from your life. And your fourth consideration is probably the most simple, but it's the one that you need to do from the most introspective point of reflection. How do you feel after? How do you feel after you've watched porn, and how do you feel after you've pleasured yourself? If you feel good, you feel like it was something that you enjoyed, but you don't feel a necessity to do it again, it's probably fine. It's probably something that you've got under control, and it's probably something that's ultimately benefiting your mood and something that's actually enhancing your well-being at the same time. If you feel shame, if you feel lonely, if you feel isolated, if you feel negative, pained emotions after you've masturbated and watched porn, that's a very negative sign, because that's a sign that you know something is not right in your mind, and your mind is trying to tell you that you need to make a change. And if you're feeling lonely, desolate, and like you're just devoid of human connection, this is a sign that you've got a real part of you and a real part of your life that's not being met. You've got a need to socialise, you've got a need to have intimacy, and you're not getting it with people in everyday life. And you're beginning to realise that porn is not going to provide you with that need. And in fact, you're probably feeling so down because you're realising that the more porn you're watching, the less that need is being met. And in fact, your need for human beings in everyday contact and intimate contact is probably getting stronger. So it's a really important question, and one I would definitely recommend that you ask yourself the next time you do it. Just how do you feel, and what does that feeling say about you? Because we're human beings, we run on feelings, we run on emotions. And yes, a lot of you watching this will be men and you'll have really good control of your emotions, but that doesn't mean that the emotions that you feel are actually healthy. And if they are negative and they're pulling you and they're trying to tell you something, you need to address those, you need to talk about those, and you need to acknowledge that there's a problem and something that's missing in your life. This is a common cycle, and this is again a common cycle with any type of addiction. It begins to start off as fun, but before long it's brought you to new lows, and the final low tends to be shame and self-pity and self-hatred. Porn can do that just like any other addiction, and you want to stop that addiction before it even comes to that point. So if you're recognising that and you're seeing early signs of those feelings, stop. Try and control it there and then. I don't know what that control is, it will probably be different based on what your tolerance is and based on just how far down the addiction process you are. But make that effort to stop and make that effort to acknowledge that negative feeling, because it needs to be addressed. And that's it. A really interesting topic, a really powerful topic, and one that I'll probably discuss on this channel in a lot more depth at some point. I hope you got a lot from it, and I hope a lot of what I said resonated, and I hope a lot of what I said is going to have a powerful impact on your life. But as always, if you like this video, please can I ask you to click like and subscribe down below. If you really liked it, I'm also offering one-on-one coaching at the website also down below. But as always guys, nothing but love, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.